Ukrainians were part of the nuclear weapons production complex in the old Soviet Union. One of whom we tracked very closely because he was helping Iran's nuclear program in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and provided significant assistance on the very things you would want to do if you were going to build the kind of nuclear weapon this Ukrainian is talking about. And so there may be Ukrainians, former Soviet nuclear weapons experts, Ukrainians still around willing to help. And it won't be a fat man device. It'll be a more sophisticated device.
Now, the Times revealed earlier today that Ukraine could develop a rudimentary nuclear bomb within months if Donald Trump withdraws US military assistance, and that's according to a briefing paper prepared for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The country would quickly be able to build a basic device from plutonium with a similar technology to the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki in 1945, devastating the city and killing so many thousands of people. Ukraine still controls 9 operational reactors and has significant nuclear expertise, despite having given up the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in 1996. Well, David Albright is a former weapons inspector for the United Nations. He's an author and founder of the Institute for Science and International Security. He's on the line. David, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well indeed. Now, this seems alarming. I'm just wondering what your response is to these revelations that this was a briefing paper prepared for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. How seriously do you take it?
Unfortunately, I take it pretty seriously. I mean, politically, it appears to be an obvious threat to the Trump administration that Ukraine could do the worst thing possible, build nuclear weapons. And so it clearly appears to be an attempt to create some leverage and get the Trump people, whoever they're going to be, to start seriously thinking about the consequences of their action, that the Ukrainians are not just going to lie over or drop their fight and surrender, in a sense, to the Russians just because Trump doesn't like the war. So I think that part is fairly transparent. Now, one of the things that disturbed me in the whole thing and why I take it more seriously is there were Ukrainians were part of the nuclear weapons production complex in the old Soviet Union. One of whom we tracked very closely because he was helping Iran's nuclear program in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And provided significant assistance on the very things you would want to do if you were going to build the kind of nuclear weapon this Ukrainian is talking about. And so there may be Ukrainians, former Soviet nuclear weapons experts, Ukrainians still around willing to help. And it won't be a fat man device. It'll be a more sophisticated device. Now, that being said,
when you say that, can you explain the distinction? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's wondering, okay, about the science of this, science as a prelude to the horror. Can you take us through that?
Yeah. The Fat Man device was very simple from a nuclear weapons point of view and very big and heavy. The innovations that have happened then that are accessible to the Ukrainians. I mean, a Ukrainian from the former nuclear weapons program provided that kind of information to the Iranians in the late 90s and early 2000s. So what it does is it drastically reduces the size and weight of the nuclear explosive. And I'll call it a nuclear explosive because another challenge is making it rugged enough to put on a ballistic missile. And I don't think Ukraine could dream of doing that in even 6 months, maybe not even a year. But in terms of building a nuclear explosive device, this author thought about it. And I don't know if he thought about who in Ukraine could provide very detailed nuclear weapons expertise, but he thought about how they would use the plutonium that's available to them. They have a huge reservoir of plutonium, and it's in spent fuel, and it's been sort of out of the reactor for years. And it wouldn't be that hard to actually separate the plutonium. I mean, scientists, plutonium separation experts at Oak Ridge National Laboratory several decades ago designed a plant very easy to build, very unsafe, probably not going to last that long, but more than sufficient to separate out 10 kilograms of plutonium from light water reactor spent fuel, more irradiated than what Ukraine has in its storage pool. So I think the part of extracting the plutonium from old irradiated reactor fuel is quite credible. And then he seemed to realize that if you do that, you're going to get a low yield nuclear explosion. I mean, I won't go into the technical details.
Right. I mean, this is really interesting for those
but
following.
That's what you're faced with.
Yeah.
But seem to know that.
Right. The Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies, that's the think tank that produced this paper for the Defense Ministry. And I understand it was presented today at a conference attended by Ukraine's Ministers for Defense and Strategic Industries. The Kiev government hasn't endorsed it, but it sets out the legal basis under which Ukraine could withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, according to the Times. When it comes to leverage, the kind of leverage they're seeking from an incoming Trump administration, what's the likelihood of them getting it if they say, look, we really are going to do this? And what might the Russian reaction be?
Well, I think with the Trump administration, you don't know. I mean, if it was a Biden administration, based on how they've acted in Iran, tremendous leverage. It could really turn things over, really shuffle the deck of cards on policy. With Trump, you just don't know. It may have a big impact. It may not. And Ukraine is taking a substantial risk by doing this so publicly and also so early. I mean, things are moving very fast here. And what the group of people in the National Security Council are going to be making critical decisions along with cabinet secretaries is still not clear. And some of the loud voices may have nothing to do with these kind of decisions. So I think it's a little premature to do this, and I think they would have been smarter just to keep it secret and present it in a more timed manner.
Or even present it as a fait accompli, David, or even present it as a fait accompli. I mean, why would you announce this?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they would want to do that. I think, well, if they want leverage, they don't want to do it. I mean, it's a dilemma for them. If they just really want to do it, then yes, of course, keep it as secret as possible. Now, the trouble is Ukrainian government can keep secrets, but I don't think it has high assurance that the United States and or Russia aren't going to learn those secrets. And so the public may not, but it's unclear what a member of the Ukrainian government would do faced with learning this as a super secret project. So I don't think they could really count on keeping it secret. Now, Russia Russia constantly threatens the use of nuclear weapons. I mean, to me, it's mostly a bluff. I think it's more serious than just in some cases where it's happened. But he knows that if he uses them, he risks his own annihilation. And I think how a Ukrainian nuclear weapon would play into this would be even with Putin bluffing, would be seen as extremely damaging, and he would try to preempt whatever he could preempt to try to block them, and so it could lead to a kind of an escalation as Putin tries to figure out where are they separating the plutonium, where are they working on the device itself, can they put it on a warhead, where are they working on that, and so it could lead to quite an escalation as Russia tries to eliminate the program before it can finish.
Yeah, and finally, and briefly, David, I mean, I said in my intro that Ukraine gave up the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in 1996, and the country's supporters say it has been betrayed by the West because it expected security guarantees from nearly 30 years ago. They haven't been acted upon, although weapons have flowed in from NATO countries. How great is the extent of the betrayal, do you think?
I think it's a great betrayal, and I'm not speaking just as someone who was in Washington. I spent much of the year in Germany, and I watched the debate. I think Europe has really betrayed Ukraine fundamentally, and is not rising to the challenge that's being posed by Putin, and is really could risk having a lot of its territory taken. I mean, not just in Ukraine. I mean, I don't think Putin will stop at that point. I think if Trump gets his way, and as is superficially expressed, and often it is just superficial statements that he makes, Ukraine would essentially be surrendering. And I think Putin has completely changed the nature of this country to be able to produce massive amounts of conventional armaments. It's built on the back of the suffering of its own people and Western goods, but nonetheless, it far outpaces what Europe is doing, particularly in countries like Germany and France. And Russia could win this arms race against Europe, and much of the governments of Europe are asleep and think that everything's fine. We just do the same and everything is fine.
Well, maybe Trump will wake them up, David. Thank you.
I don't think it will. I think they'll blame America.
Yeah, maybe.
They won't say, look, maybe, there's a real problem here you need to face. I think they'll be trying to say, well, Trump is a madman. He's terrible. And some of that is true, but that's not what's happening with Ukraine and the dynamics playing out there, because even if Biden won and continued the aid, it's not enough. Ukraine is not winning the war.
Yeah. All right, David Albright, thank you very much indeed for spending time with us this evening. David is a former weapons inspector for the UN, and he is the author of Peddling Peril, How the Secret Nuclear Trade Arms America's Enemies.